Pam Bondi leans forward, her voice sharp, her tone dripping with authority. She thinks she owns the room. But then Jasmine Crockett interrupts, calm, precise, unshaken. That's why you can't. The words cut like a blade. The chamber freezes. Bondi blinks, her smirk collapsing into silence. A politician who built her career on control suddenly looks rattled, cornered, and exposed. Freeze frame. Narrator voice, Pam Bondi thought she was untouchable. Armed with years of courtroom swagger, television appearances, and the aura of someone who believed she could talk down anyone. She had interrupted, deflected, and bulldozed her way through opponents countless times before. But in this moment, everything flipped. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another name on the roster. She wasn't intimidated, and she wasn't playing defense. In less than 5 minutes, Crockett flipped the script and dismantling Bondi's image of authority and silencing her in a way that millions of Americans had been waiting to see. The audience in the room knew it. Social media would know it in minutes. And by the next day, the entire country would be replaying the clip of Bondi being verbally annihilated by someone who refused to bow to arrogance. This wasn't just a political exchange. It was a cinematic takedown, a clash of power ego, and truth condensed into 5 unforgettable minutes. And the opening shot wasn't a debate or a long argument. It was a single line, a single pause, a single look that told the world, Pam Bondi doesn't control this room anymore. The silence after Crockett's words was deafening. You could feel the energy shift like the oxygen had been sucked out of the chamber. What Bondi thought would be her moment to shine instantly turned into the moment that defined her downfall. Because here's the truth, takedowns don't always come from shouting or grandstanding. Sometimes they come from poised precision and the courage to stand firm while your opponent unravels. And that's exactly what Jasmine Crockett delivered. A Pam Bondi thought she was untouchable until Jasmine Crockett destroyed her in just 5 minutes. But to understand why this moment shattered Bondi's entire persona, we need to rewind. Pam Bondi wasn't just another talking head. For years, she had been a rising star in Republican politics, a former Florida attorney general with a flair for the cameras and a reputation for defending the indefensible. She had stood by Donald Trump during his most chaotic scandals, often appearing on television to spin, deflect, and deliver her signature brand of polished arrogance. To her supporters, she was sharp and unflinching. To her critics, she was the embodiment of political opportunism. She walked into every room with the confidence of someone who had been told all her life she was the smartest person there. She didn't just debate opponents. She swatted them away, rolling her eyes, talking over them, and drowning them in rehearsed talking points. Bondi built her brand on control. And until now, that brand had worked. But the stage she was stepping onto this time wasn't friendly. She wasn't debating a cable news anchor eager to move on to commercial break. She wasn't sitting with hosts who would nod along politely. She was up against Jasmine Crockett, a woman who had no interest in playing along with political theater. Crockett, a freshman congresswoman from Texas, had already built a reputation that struck fear into opponents. She was sharp, unfiltered, and unafraid of confrontation. In every committee hearing, she became known for what millions of Americans secretly wish their leaders would do: call out hypocrisy to its face with a precision that left no wiggle room. She didn't just argue, she exposed. And that's what made this moment more than a clash of personalities. It wasn't just two women clashing, it was two Americas colliding. On one side stood Bondi, a polished symbol of establishment politics, carefully packaged, backed by years of insider status, and cloaked in arrogance. On the other stood Crockett, a voice of raw authenticity, armed with the lived experiences of ordinary Americans and the unshakable belief that truth can cut through spin. For the audience watching, the stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't simply about who could deliver the best soundbite. It was about whether dignity could withstand arrogance, whether honesty could hold its ground against manipulation, whether America was ready to reward authenticity over theatrics. Bondi's strategy was simple: do what she had always done. Intimidate, talk over, overwhelm. But Crockett wasn't intimidated. Every glance, every pause, every word carried the weight of someone who had faced harder fights than this. She didn't see Bondi as untouchable. She saw her as vulnerable. The moment was electric before a single word was spoken. Audiences leaned in, sensing that this would not be business as usual. The political establishment might have been used to Bondi steamrolling opponents, but Crockett was about to prove that the era of unchecked arrogance had an expiration date. This was bigger than a 5-minute exchange. It was a test of strength, will, and truth under pressure. And the tension in that room, the sense that something unforgettable was about to unfold, was undeniable. Pam Bondi entered that chamber confident she could control the narrative. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to play defense. She was there to flip the script. It wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. But before Crockett landed the blow, the villain had to reveal her hand. Pam Bondi didn't stumble into power. She crafted it brick by brick, appearance by appearance, headline by headline. Her rise began in Florida, where she positioned herself as the glamorous prosecutor turned politician. As Florida's Attorney General, Bondi mastered the art of presenting herself as a champion of law and order while quietly aligning with some of the most controversial causes. To the cameras, she was polished, poised, and articulate. Behind the curtain, she played politics like a ruthless game of chess. One of her most infamous moments came during the Trump presidency. When others hesitated to stand beside him during times of scandal, Bondi was there. She was on his legal defense team during the impeachment battles, stepping onto the national stage with the same confidence she carried in Tallahassee. On cable news panels, she became a regular fixture, delivering carefully rehearsed talking points with the calm authority of someone who believed she could bend reality with her tone alone. To her supporters, Bondi looked like a warrior, unafraid to defend her allies no matter how controversial the case. But to millions of Americans watching from home, she became something else entirely, the face of political spin. When the facts were damning, Bondi smiled. When the truth was inconvenient, she deflected. When the questions got too sharp, she talked louder, faster, longer, anything to drown out dissent. That's where her arrogance shone brightest. Pam Bondi didn't win debates through substance. She won them by talking over people. She wielded her voice like a weapon, interrupting, cutting off, and smothering opponents until they ran out of breath or time. To her, domination equaled victory. And for years it worked. Journalists, politicians, even seasoned attorneys struggled to cut through the wall of polished rhetoric she threw up at every turn. Her method was simple. If you can't answer the question, bury it under a flood of words. If you can't defend the truth, bend it until it sounds like you can. But this strategy had a fatal flaw. It relied on others backing down. It relied on opponents being polite, deferential, or unwilling to push back as hard as she pushed forward. Enter Jasmine Crockett. Bondi had built her brand on calculated hypocrisy. She claimed to champion ethics, yet her time as Attorney General was riddled with controversies, most notably the revelation that she solicited political donations from Trump's foundation around the time her office declined to pursue fraud allegations against Trump University. To critics, it looked like pay. To Bondi, it was just politics as usual. She projected strength while often masking weakness. She sold integrity while cashing in on access. She wore the mask of moral authority while defending figures who had none. And the cameras ate it up. Bondi was, in many ways, the perfect villain for a political drama. She didn't snarl or shout. She smiled while twisting the knife. She didn't storm into rooms. She glided in, fully aware of her image, fully rehearsed in her performance. That made her dangerous. But it also made her brittle, because performance only works as long as the audience keeps buying it. The longer Bondi stayed in the spotlight, the more cracks began to show. The contradictions piled up. The hypocrisy became harder to ignore. She could outtalk many of her opponents, but she couldn't outtalk reality forever. And yet, she kept going, doubling down, appearing on bigger stages, convinced that her formula was foolproof, convinced that her control of the narrative was permanent, convinced that no one would ever truly challenge her authority in real time. Pam Bondi's arrogance was her armor, but arrogance, when met with truth, can become a target. For years, she'd built a career out of talking over people, until she met someone who wouldn't let her. Bondi's playbook had worked for nearly 2 decades, but in one fateful 5-minute exchange, Jasmine Crockett would tear that playbook to pieces. Because if Bondi's story was about carefully constructed power, Crockett's story was about raw resilience. And the two were about to collide in a way that would leave Bondi silenced and Crockett immortalized. But Crockett's story couldn't have been more different. She was underestimated until her words could no longer be ignored. Jasmine Crockett didn't come from the insulated world of elite politics where connections decide futures. She came from grit, from the classrooms and neighborhoods where struggle wasn't theoretical. It was lived every day. Her rise was never about polish or privilege. It was about persistence. Long before she made headlines for shutting down opponents in viral clips, Crockett was known for something simpler, standing her ground. As a public defender in Texas, she represented those who couldn't afford high-priced attorneys, the ones society often wrote off. In dingy courtrooms with fluorescent lights, she sharpened her voice against injustice. She wasn't just arguing cases, she was absorbing stories of people steamrolled by a system tilted against them. That sharpened her instincts. It taught her to cut through excuses, to slice into contradictions, and to fight with a kind of courtroom precision that few politicians could ever mimic. Her reputation grew bold, unafraid, unwilling to back down. Even when the odds weren't in her favor, Crockett wasn't just a lawyer, she was an advocate who brought fire to every room she entered. That fire carried her into politics. When she entered the Texas House of Representatives, many underestimated her. She was new, she was young, and she didn't carry the same polish that career politicians wore like armor. But that was her edge. She didn't try to imitate the establishment. She challenged it. While others spoke in rehearsed platitudes, Crockett spoke in the unfiltered language of frustration and truth that everyday people recognized instantly. And she had a talent that made her stand out in a crowded political arena, the comeback. Where opponents leaned on talking points, she struck back with sharp precision, sometimes witty, sometimes scathing, but always memorable. Clips of her exchanges began circulating online, and people noticed. Not just because she was bold, but because she was authentic. Jasmine Crockett became, in many ways, a vessel for the outrage bubbling across America. Ordinary people who felt ignored, dismissed, or silenced suddenly had a champion who could package their anger into laser-focused sentences that landed like punches. She didn't drown out opponents with noise. She cut them down with clarity. That's what made her dangerous to figures like Bondi. While Bondi relied on polish and performance, Crockett wielded raw precision. While Bondi cloaked herself in authority, Crockett wielded the power of plain truth. Their styles couldn't have been more different. One rehearsed, the other real. One detached, the other deeply connected to the people watching at home. But Crockett's journey wasn't without cost. Her refusal to back down earned her enemies. Critics labeled her too aggressive, too emotional, or too blunt. The predictable words used to try to shrink women who refused to shrink themselves. Yet, every attempt to silence her only made her stronger, because for every critic, there were thousands of people watching who whispered, finally, someone who says what we're all thinking. Her political style became a rallying cry. She didn't just argue, she exposed. She didn't just debate, she revealed hypocrisy in real time. She didn't just defend herself, she defended the millions who had grown tired of watching politicians skate by on arrogance and performance. And perhaps that's why Crockett's words carried such weight. She wasn't speaking at people. She was speaking for them. When she unleashed a scathing line, it didn't feel like theater. It felt like justice being delivered live for everyone who had waited too long to see arrogance finally challenged. Her sharpest moments weren't accidents. They were the product of years in courtrooms where silence wasn't an option. She learned early that hesitation could cost a client their freedom. That clarity could be the difference between justice served and justice denied. That urgency infused everything she said. Every pause, every phrase, every comeback felt like it had stakes behind it. Because for her, it always did. Crockett's rise to national attention wasn't the story of someone chasing the spotlight. It was the story of someone who became unavoidable. The more she spoke truth to power, the more her words spread across social media, across news cycles, across kitchen tables where families whispered, "Did you hear what she just said?" And while her opponents dismissed her as fiery but fleeting, Crockett proved them wrong again and again. Every exchange showed that she wasn't just a moment, she was a movement. So when Pam Bondi, polished and arrogant, stepped into the arena with Jasmine Crockett, the collision was inevitable. Bondi's brand was built on silencing others. Crockett's entire career was built on refusing to be silenced. One represented the performance of power, the other represented the reality of resistance. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a clash of legacies. One woman who had spent years speaking over others, and another who had spent her career speaking for them. So when these two forces collided, the sparks were inevitable. Every jab Bondi threw only made Crockett's silence more dangerous. The room was already charged before a single word was spoken. Cameras rolled, lights glared, and you could almost feel the weight of what was about to unfold. Pam Bondi, with her trademark poise, leaned forward, her voice laced with the confidence of someone who had spent years talking over opponents on national television. She tried to dominate the moment the way she always had, by cutting in, interrupting, and wielding her polished tone like a weapon. Bondi postured as though she was untouchable, tossing out deflections and rehearsed lines designed to keep the spotlight firmly on her. Every phrase dripped with condescension, a performance not just for her opponent, but for the cameras and the audience she believed still admired her. But across the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She didn't even try to speak over Bondi's theatrics. Instead, she waited, measured, silent, the kind of silence that doesn't surrender, it tightens. With every second Crockett didn't bite, the tension in the room sharpened like a blade. Viewers could see it. Bondi was swinging wild, her words landing softer with every attempt. Crockett's restraint wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Every jab Bondi threw, every smug deflection, only deepened the anticipation of what was coming. You could sense it building, like a storm just beyond the horizon. Bondi leaned harder into her act. She accused, she mocked, she tried to frame herself as the voice of authority, casting Crockett as the upstart challenger who didn't deserve the same stage. But what Bondi didn't realize was that every interruption exposed her insecurity. Every attempt to drown Crockett out only highlighted the imbalance of power, an imbalance that was about to flip. And Crockett, she was steady, patient, watching Bondi unravel brick by brick. Every smirk from Bondi was matched by Crockett's unshaken composure. Every time Bondi tried to corner her, Crockett stepped aside without moving an inch. The tension was unbearable, and audiences watching could feel it in their bones. Bondi was burning fuel too fast. The debate wasn't about facts anymore. It was about presence. And Crockett's presence was overwhelming, even in silence. Her stillness became louder than Bondi's noise. Her measured pauses carried more gravity than Bondi's practiced sound bites. It was the ultimate reversal. The woman who had built a career out of dominating conversations suddenly looked desperate to hold on to control. Bondi's voice grew sharper, but her arguments weaker. She threw out accusations like sparks from a dying fire, hoping one would catch. But Crockett's patience made every spark look like smoke, and the audience, both in the room and across the country, leaned closer, waiting for the inevitable moment when the silence would break. And then Crockett's eyes narrowed. Her body shifted slightly forward, like a fighter finally stepping into the ring. She had given Bondi every chance to overplay her hand, and Bondi had taken the bait. The arrogance, the interruptions, the hollow bravado had all piled up, creating the perfect setup. The air thickened. Everyone knew it was coming. Crockett's lips parted, her voice calm but cutting. This wasn't going to be another exchange of rehearsed lines. This was going to be the turning point. And then it happened. In just 5 minutes, Bondi's entire career of deflection collapsed. The silence was heavy. Crockett leaned forward, calm, her eyes locked on Bondi like a surgeon preparing for an incision. No wasted movement, no nervous glance. Just the kind of focus that says, I've been waiting for this moment. Bondi's smirk flickered. For the first time that night, she didn't look like the one in control. Crockett began, not with anger, not with shouting, but with precision. Her voice was steady, deliberate, the kind of tone that forces the room to lean in. Achar. That's why you can't lecture anyone here, Pam. It landed like the opening jab in a prize fight. Not enough to knock out, but enough to sting, enough to set the rhythm. Bondi blinked, her rehearsed mask cracking ever so slightly. She tried to interject, but Crockett didn't give her the oxygen. Chore. You spent years defending corruption, twisting yourself into knots to justify what every American could see with their own eyes. And now, you sit here pretending to be the voice of integrity. The audience shifted. Phones tilted upward. Everyone sensed this wasn't just an exchange, it was an unraveling. Bondi tried to push back. That's not. But Crockett cut her off, not with volume, but with authority. No, you don't get to rewrite history. Not tonight. A pause. The kind of pause that makes every syllable heavier. Then she went in again. Chua, you defended the indefensible. You turned your back on accountability. And the only reason you're sitting here now is because people like me didn't stay silent. Gossips. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The balance had shifted. Bondi, once so polished, now looked rattled. Her eyes darted, her smile strained, her fingers tapping the table as though searching for footing. But Crockett wasn't finished. She was just warming up. See, Pam, the difference between us is simple. You built your career protecting power. I built mine protecting people. That's why you can't win this argument, because the truth doesn't bend the way you do. It was a scalpel disguised as a sentence. Bondi's face tightened. She looked cornered, exposed. And Crockett kept going, layering every word like bricks in a wall closing in. Every time you talk about law and order, I remember the law you ignored. Every time you say America first, I remember the Americans you left behind. And every time you try to silence me, you remind everyone watching exactly why my voice matters. The room erupted, applause, laughter, even a few cheers. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a dismantling. Bondi's strategy of interruption collapsed. She sat back, lips pressed thin, trying to contain the unraveling. But every second of silence from her made Crockett's words echo louder. And then came the knockout. Crockett leaned in, her voice dropping lower, slower, forcing Bondi to hear every syllable. Chore, Pam, you've spent your career talking over people. But here's the truth. You're not untouchable. You're not above accountability. And tonight, right here, you are out of excuses. For a split second, the room froze. You could hear the shuffle of cameras repositioning, the click of keyboards, the breath of an audience holding on. Bondi's face was pale now, her trademark grin gone. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Silence. Crockett didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply let the silence speak, the silence of a villain finally without lines to recite. And then, like only Crockett could, she delivered the final line. You're done? Pam. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, definitive, absolute. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, claps, even laughter breaking through the tension. Social media would later explode with that clip. 3 words replayed millions of times. You're done, Pam. 5 minutes. That's all it took. 5 minutes to dismantle years of polished spin. 5 minutes to strip away the mask of authority Bondi had worn like armor. 5 minutes to prove that arrogance crumbles when faced with unshakable truth. And it wasn't just what Crockett said, it was how she said it. The pauses, the steady tone, the refusal to let Bondi dictate the rhythm. Every beat was calculated not to humiliate for sport, but to expose the truth Bondi had tried to bury. By the end, the debate wasn't about politics, it was about dignity. Crockett had shown that no amount of power, no amount of polish could shield someone from accountability when the truth was finally spoken aloud. Bondi sat there silenced. Her usual arsenal of smirks and sound bites had failed her. The cameras didn't capture a champion of her side. They captured a woman cornered, stripped of control, staring at the one person she couldn't outtalk. And Crockett, she didn't bask in it. She didn't need to. She leaned back calm, as though to say that's enough. Because it was. The crowd buzzed, commentators scrambled, and within hours, the clip spread everywhere. Twitter hashtags, TikTok edits, headlines screaming about the 5-minute takedown that no one saw coming. Pam Bondi, the seasoned operator, had been reduced to silence, not by shouting, not by chaos, but by clarity. And Jasmine Crockett had written herself into the history books, not with noise, but with precision. But what happened next showed just how powerful this moment really was Within hours, Crockett's words were everywhere, and Bondi's silence was louder than ever. The clip of that 5-minute exchange spread like wildfire. First came the immediate reactions in the room: laughter, applause, the unmistakable sound of a crowd recognizing they'd just witnessed history. But what happened once the footage hit the internet was something else entirely. On Twitter, hashtag shot to the top of the trends list. Find your Don Pam. A Crockett McDrop. 5 minutes of truth. Each one carried thousands of retweets. Videos clipped down to the exact moment Crockett leaned in and delivered the line that would echo across the political universe. You're done, Pam. A meme culture wasted no time. Within the first hour, GIFs of Bondi's face as the smirk drained away were everywhere. TikTok users layered Crockett's voice over scenes of collapsing buildings, domino chains falling, and even dramatic movie moments where the villain realizes defeat is inevitable. On Instagram, edits paired her takedown with cinematic music, framing her not just as a politician, but as a modern-day hero. Commentators jumped in too. Progressive outlets called it the 5-minute masterclass in accountability. Even more neutral voices admitted it was a moment they couldn't stop replaying. She didn't just silence Bondi. One journalist wrote, "She silenced years of arrogance." Meanwhile, Bondi was trending for all the wrong reasons. Her name became shorthand for collapse, for hubris undone. Screenshots of her paling face circulated with captions like, "When the lies finally catch up," and Pam realizing it's over. People who had once seen her as untouchable were now sharing jokes about how quickly Crockett dismantled her. The contrast was stark. Crockett's side of the internet celebrated with pride and vindication, while Bondi's defenders scrambled, some claiming bias, others trying desperately to reframe the narrative. But the damage was done. The internet had chosen its hero. YouTube channels spliced the clip into reaction videos. Podcasters dissected every beat of Crockett's cadence, her pauses, her timing. Even late, night hosts found room for it, replaying Bondi's silence to the laughter of studio audiences. What made it so powerful wasn't just Crockett's precision, it was what it represented. Millions of people who had long felt talked over by figures like Bondi finally saw someone flip the script. Crockett wasn't just arguing policy. She was embodying dignity, composure, and unflinching truth in the face of smug arrogance. And audiences felt that deeply. In comment sections across platforms, ordinary viewers left messages like, "I've never felt so seen in a political debate." Finally, someone who didn't let her get away with it, Jasmine Crockett, just gave America the clapback we've been waiting for. It was more than a viral moment. It was validation. For every person who had watched politicians dodge accountability with a smile, this was catharsis. For every person told to stay quiet, this was proof that silence can be broken. Crockett became a trending figure, not just in politics, but in culture. Fan accounts started posting edits of her greatest comebacks, dubbing her the people's advocate. One viral tweet summed it up perfectly. Pam Bondi built her brand on silencing others. Jasmine Crockett just ended that brand in 5 minutes flat. Meanwhile, Bondi's team stayed quiet, too quiet. Her usual willingness to spin, to jump in front of cameras, evaporated. In the silence, her reputation unraveled faster. Every hour she didn't respond made Crockett's words ring louder. The shockwaves didn't stop at the internet. News segments began replaying the clip in primetime, dissecting it like a cultural turning point. Analysts compared it to famous debate takedowns of the past, calling it a generational mic drop. It wasn't just a clip anymore. It was a story, a narrative that spread from living rooms to classrooms to office break rooms. People weren't just saying, "Did you see that?" They were saying, "This is what accountability looks like." The 5-minute takedown had become more than political entertainment. It had become a rallying cry. Crockett's words weren't just silencing Pam Bondi. They were empowering millions who saw themselves in her composure, her clarity, her refusal to be drowned out. And while Bondi's silence hung like a shadow, Crockett's voice filled the void. Every replay, every retweet, every meme carried the same unspoken message: arrogance has limits, and truth still has power. But this wasn't just about a single viral clip. It was about what it meant for America. This wasn't a takedown. It was a reminder of who we are. Because what Jasmine Crockett did in those 5 minutes wasn't just about silencing Pam Bondi. It wasn't even just about winning a debate. It was about reframing power itself. For too long, arrogance has been mistaken for authority. Polished spin has been mistaken for truth. Loud voices have drowned out the quieter ones, and the people most willing to bend the rules have often been the ones to climb the fastest. But Crockett flipped that script. Her words showed that dignity will always outlast arrogance. That truth cuts sharper than deflection. That service to people is stronger than service to power. And in that moment, millions watching didn't just see a politician doing her job, they saw themselves reflected in her composure. They saw what it looks like when someone refuses to be intimidated, refuses to shrink, refuses to let arrogance carry the day. Crockett reminded America of something fundamental. Power doesn't come from titles or from networks or from carefully rehearsed lines. Real power comes from authenticity, from clarity, from standing in the truth, even when others try to shout you down. That's why her words hit so hard. Because they weren't just aimed at Bondi, they were aimed at everyone who's ever been dismissed, interrupted, or underestimated. Every worker silenced in a meeting. Every citizen told their voice doesn't matter. Every person made to feel small in the presence of someone acting bigger. Crockett carried them all in her tone, in her patience, in the way she refused to play Bondi's game. And when she finally spoke, it felt like justice, personal, intimate, long overdue. And here's the lesson. Arrogance always burns itself out. It consumes too much fuel, demands too much attention, creates too many cracks. Truth, on the other hand, is patient. It waits. It listens. It holds steady until the right moment, and then it shines. That's what Crockett embodied. She didn't match arrogance with arrogance. She matched it with composure. She didn't fight fire with fire. She let arrogance collapse under its own weight, and then spoke the truth that couldn't be ignored. It's a reminder of the kind of America people still believe in, an America where accountability matters, where no one is above being questioned, where the loudest voice doesn't automatically win, where dignity is not weakness but strength. In that sense, Crockett's 5 minutes were more than a viral clip. They were a parable, a demonstration that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits silently until the exact right moment, and then it speaks with devastating clarity. And that clarity changes things. It changes the way we see politics, not just as theater, but as a stage where truth can still win. It changes the way we see leadership, not as domination, but as representation. It changes the way we see ourselves, not as powerless, but as participants in a larger story. That's why the clip matters. That's why people shared it. Not just because it was entertaining, but because it felt like a piece of justice delivered in real time. Crockett's takedown wasn't about humiliating an opponent. It was about elevating the standard, showing that politics doesn't have to be endless noise, that it can still deliver clarity, accountability, and dignity. And that's the lesson audiences walked away with. That's why the moment spread beyond politics into culture. Because deep down, people want to believe that arrogance doesn't win forever. That truth still has a chance. That when someone stands up with clarity, they can cut through even the most polished deception. That's why this clip will live far beyond the hearing room. Because it wasn't just about Pam Bondi. It was about every arrogance that needs to be challenged, every lie that needs to be exposed, every silence that needs to be broken. And Jasmine Crockett gave us the reminder: when dignity speaks, arrogance falls silent. Pam Bondi may have spoken for years, but Jasmine Crockett ensured the last word was hers. And that's why this moment matters. Because in just 5 minutes, Crockett didn't just dismantle a talking point, she dismantled an entire way of doing politics. She showed that arrogance, no matter how polished, collapses when faced with clarity and courage. Think about it. How many times have we seen people like Bondi dominate conversations, speak over others, and get away with it? And how often do we wish, just once, that someone would finally hold them accountable in the moment without flinching? Crockett gave us that moment. She gave us the satisfaction of seeing truth rise above noise and dignity triumph over deflection. But here's the bigger picture. This clip is more than entertainment. It's a rallying cry, a reminder that when arrogance is confronted with courage, it can't stand. A reminder that truth still has a voice, and it's louder than spin. And now, it's on us to carry that forward. Oh, if you believe arrogance shouldn't go unchallenged, subscribe. If you want more stories of truth tellers standing tall, hit the like button. And if you know someone who needs to see what courage looks like, share this video with them, because this isn't just about Jasmine Crockett versus Pam Bondi. It's about all of us and the America we're building, an America where the last word doesn't belong to arrogance, but to truth. And together, we can make sure that word keeps echoing.